I knew that was going to be very interesting and enthusiastic, and apart from all of his qualifications, he's a very good salesman as well. Now we're going to be moving to the panel discussion, and I'm just going to briefly introduce some of the panellists, or all of the panellists to you. We have Michael Meacher here, and he's been involved in politics in Britain since 1970. He was heavily involved in the Wilson and Callaghan administrations, and he's been involved in the environment area in the British administration since 1997. I mean, we have a considerable level of expertise on the panel, led by Michael there. Just to Michael's right and your left is the Right Honourable Edward Schreyer, and his involvement in public administration goes back to 1958, which was 4 years before I popped out in the Bond Secures Hospital here in Cork in 1962, and he's been involved that long. His CV is extremely impressive. He started off in 1958 in the Manitoba legislature. He was the Governor-General of Canada for 13 years. He was involved in High Commissioner roles in various countries for 4 years. He's visiting professor in several universities, and his expertise is in resource management, and of course he's involved with ASPO in Canada. We also have, delighted to say, the Minister, Eamon, Minister for Communications, Energy and Human Resources. He's one of the most interesting people in Irish politics. He has been for a long time. He's been sitting, or had been sitting, in the opposition benches banging on about the environment and energy costs in and out of various debates, and being seen as one of those politicians on the fringe. Well, he now has the reins of power in his hands. He's an extremely interesting man, I find, to meet on a personal level as well as on an intellectual level, and I was absolutely delighted to see the Green Party get into power, and particularly to see Eamon Ryan take up such a key ministership. For those who don't know, the largest party in opposition in the Republic of Ireland is Fine Gael, and we're joined by the Fine Gael energy spokesperson, also on the panel, Bernard Durkan. So that's everybody introduced. I'm going to chair it from up here. I have reasonable vision to the back of the hall, so I'm going to start by taking questions from. We'll just get the roaming mic. If it just. Yeah, just here on the front. I'll start at the front. If you could just, by the way, when you ask a question, if you could just briefly introduce yourself to the panel and then address your question to who you wish to address to.
This is to Eddie and most of the panel. It basically, given the great financial implications of wind, it's so profitable at the moment, and demand has basically been exploding. There has been issues around getting enough skilled employees to build and work on these wind turbines. And if you go to the Vista's website, Vista's being one of the largest turbine manufacturers, their turbine towers now, the steel is paper thin, because in the massive run-up in demand, there was a shortage of steel on the world market due to this demand. Some of the turbine manufacturers, their production is now booked till 2010 and beyond. This has created some difficulties for the industry, and I'm just wondering how the panel would deal with that.
Well, Eddie, do you want to take the lead on that one?
Yeah, I don't mind that, because that's a very important question and has to be addressed, because it's exploding. Demand is exploding everywhere, and certainly China controls most of the iron and steel in the world, and so the prices of iron and copper and gearboxes and carbon fibres and everything and are all coming together, and as I said, the price has gone up by 50% in the last 3 years. In fact, the world ran out of carbon fibres there about 2 years ago, and Vestas had to build a plant in the Czech Republic. So what's to be done about this? I mean, the problem with the current wind companies is that if they build an awful lot more capacity, they'll probably see the price go down. So they're saying, well, we'll hold off and we'll milk a situation where demand exceeds supply. Now, of course, that's very fine until China gets its act together. And I can tell you that electricity is very busy in China. trying to get China's act together in manufacturing these turbines. It's a real big problem. I mean, last year we bought 500 megawatts from GE for delivery in 2008, and we had to pay out $125 million a year before we saw a turbine. So now this is big company business. All the small companies are being flushed out of the way. The whole thing is changing. So your question is extremely important, and very important for Ireland. If Ireland wants to actually get 6,000 megawatts on land and 4,000 megawatts offshore, how are we going to buy this? And the support regime has to actually, take this into account.
Because I believe very much that humankind has to begin the process of decarbonization of the respective economies and their way of life. I really believe that to be true, and therefore any course of action that can lead us credibly to that end deserves support. I think one of the unfortunate things about those who support renewable energy, the various modalities of renewable energy, has been a tendency for one group to kind of poor-mouth the other prospects and possibilities in renewable energy. It sort of reminds me of the old proverb that every duck tends to praise its own slough. I think it's unfortunate when we consider renewable energy. I believe that the challenge before us is so great in terms of displacing the quantum of oil and of natural gas, and yes, coal, that even to replace a significant part of it will require the practical application of all conceivable forms of renewable energy. And therefore, it saddens me greatly to see the wind energy enthusiasts poor-mouth the hydro enthusiasts poor-mouth the wind. The fact of the matter is we need both, and in as large and as quick a scale of application as we can possibly humanly do it.
Yeah, thank you. I might put that one to Michael. It has been estimated by some people commenting on this problem that the scale of money needed to come in to solve the scale of the problem that Edward's outlined is equivalent in modern terms to what was spent to finance the Second World War. Is that a reasonable?
Well, I would defer to others on this panel.
Yeah.
I've been around a long time, but others have as well. So
yeah, Michael, do you want to comment on what Edward's been saying?
Yeah. The energy issue, because of its magnitude, I think will ultimately fall to be dealt with by the European community as a whole. I think it requires that kind of political backup to coordinate the kind of things that Eddie was talking about, to make sure that the kind of things happen and the right degree of mix takes place between the various components that go into the grid. I think that will require ultimately the combined cooperation of each country within the European Union, because no one single country has that kind of clout.
Okay, I'll take a question from the back, if I may. You're right, yeah.
Sorry, I did have one point.
Oh, sorry, just hold your question. Yeah, go ahead.
I apologize. My point, I'll be very, very brief, is that it was said by my co-panelist, Eddie. By the way, my name is Eddie, too.
Right, okay. That's three of us up here, yeah.
Three of us.
And
yes.
Eamon is an Eddie as well, the minister to your right.
That I agree most emphatically that there is a great need for wind energy to be insinuated into our energy systems all over the world. But I also agree most emphatically that wind energy can never come into its own without the design and building of significant scale transmission capacity. That is a sine qua non for wind energy. Without it, wind energy is a 20% peripheral alternative, and that's all.
First of all, I absolutely agree that we want all forms of renewable energy. The real problem is that it seems to me that no government within probably anywhere, certainly within the EU, with the possible exception of Sweden and the Scandinavians, has actually introduced policies to provide the spread of renewable energy within their economies on anything like the scale that is required. I mean, in the case of Britain, so I can speak about that, whereas in France, Germany, Italy, Portugal, it's between 15, 20, 30% of electricity generation from renewables, in Britain it is 4%. And yet we, that is Britain and Ireland, because we're an offshore, we're our offshore island, our capacity for wind power capacity probably exceeds the whole of the rest of Europe put together. I mean, we simply are not taking this problem seriously. The potential is enormous. Very few people actually realise, and this is the US Department of Energy, who are saying that there is more wind power capacity in North and South Dakota and Texas than is needed for the entire electricity requirement of the United States. The EU Commission believes that within the waters off the coasts of Europe, up to 100 feet deep, there is a capacity for wind power which can again provide all of the electricity requirement in the European continent. The same applies to China. I mean, people talk as though there is no alternative to fossil fuels. There is an immense capability in renewables, and we're simply not even beginning. Governments have no concept of what is possible through renewables. If we are going to meet peak oil and we're going to meet climate change, we've got about 10 or 20 years to do it. We don't have to go from oil to coal. We can go, in my view, from oil through gas, probably, as an intermediate energy source towards renewables, and on a scale which I genuinely believe can save our planet.
Thank you. Well, just before I take the next question, I'm going to bring Minister Eamon Ryan in just so that I've oiled the throats of everybody on the panel. Minister, do you want to make any comments on what's been said?
I'd very briefly say in energy policy or in energy investments, we have to think long term. In the cars you buy today will be on the road in 2020, the power stations we build will be there in 2050. And to go back to Eddie's argument, I think what we need in a support systems is consistency, so that people investing in this area know that there's a consistent policy.
Okay, I'll take that question at the back here on
Richard Walsh from Our Generation, and I'd just like to congratulate Eamon Ryan on his appointment as Minister for Energy. I've been involved in the wind industry for about 5 years and the overall power industry for about 15 to 20. And while we can say we encourage wind on a macro level, we actually have to get down to the detail. And one of the key factors blocking the wind industry here in Ireland at the moment is the contestability of the 38 kV system. This means basically the prices being offered by ESB Grid actually should be on the spaceship Challenger to the moon. They're actually 300,000 a megawatt to connect into the grid. And guess what? A 5-year delivery schedule. So 2012 would be the nearest time they would have a line for us to connect in. That means our planning is out, our options and leases are out, our wind data is out. In other words, we've had a moratorium since the 3rd of December 2003, and now they're actually asking us to wait until 2012. I'm asking the Minister, because I do believe the Minister's heart is in the right place, to give this priority, because the ESB distribution system at the moment, the blackguarding that's going on, that I can tell you throughout the industry, is unbelievable. And I would ask, and I know the Commissioner for Energy Regulation, Tom Reeves, is supposed to have said and written to your own department and asked that he supported the deregulation or the contestability of the 38 kV system. This is a matter of priority. The reason why it's a matter of priority is that the Gate 2 offers are actually out at the moment. And the ESB has given us 50 business days to put down 300,000 a megawatt for a 3.6 megawatt wind farm. And we're basically this bottleneck needs to be taken out. You know, the days are gone by where people are, we'll work with you. We can't finance them.
Yeah, I think you've made your point quite well, talking about the ESB monopolising the market and inefficiencies and so on. It's a micro point. It's part of a bigger point. Minister, how do you deal with that? How do you control this monster in the semi-state sector?
I go back to what Michael said. Michael Meacher is absolutely right. To achieve the scale of change we know we need to make, everyone has to be involved. The energy regulator it's his main goal to go that. The power distribution company, network company, it's their central goal to do that. And that gives companies, each company, a purpose, a role, a vision. And I think when we share that common vision, and I'm quite convinced that we are going to have a situation in this country where everyone has that vision, we will then see it easier to get over some of the technical issues that have been holding us back.
Okay, next question here, yeah. And if you could get to the question as soon as you can. The question part, you know, the
Thank
thing
you very
at the
much.
end of the sentence with the squiggle.
My name is Michael Connolly. I'm here because I'm a father of two. My question relates to sustainability. If we get all our wishes and we solve the problem of the approaching wave of energy descent, will the result be that we create a world where 9 or 12 billion people play the planet-eating game and we eventually make ourselves and many other species extinct?
Well, that's an interesting philosophical dilemma once we get past into the new energy age. How do we control the planet from being absorbed by the scale of population growth? Maybe we need a phosphate peak to solve that problem. Michael, yeah?
Well, I think the answer to that question is that we are at serious risk of that. Because it's not just one single force which is driving the conditions on our planet. I think it is three. One, as you are saying, is the rise in population. It took mankind about 150,000 years to reach 1 billion, which was about 1800. It took 125 years to reach 2 billion. It took 14 years to reach 3 billion, another 14 years to reach 4 billion, 13 years to reach 5 billion, and 12 years to reach 6 billion. And the way we're going, we're on target to get to 7 billion in 11 years. This is frankly, utterly unsustainable. The second factor is that we are industrializing across the world, not just in the West, not just in Europe, and we've led the world in this, but now, of course, in Asia, and it will ultimately be in Africa, where the population will be 2 billion within 20 years. And all of those people want the same kind of life based on an industrial infrastructure as we have in the West. And the exploitation of resources, although we have an extraordinarily abundant Earth, is actually finite. And with an increase in population at that rate and the demand for a higher and higher standard of living equal to the best, again, it is unsustainable. And the third factor is, of course, climate change, because we are polluting our planet. We are harming the basis of our ecosystem for our own survival. There is absolutely no doubt about that. Many people say that we are now engaged in the 6th mass extinction in the history of the Earth, and this is the first time that one of the species on the Earth has actually produced it. So it is a very, very serious situation, and we need an absolutely fundamental change in the nature of our economy. And you said at the beginning that this is about sustainability. That is the essence of it. We can survive on our planet, but we can only do so if we organize our lives, our economy, our societies, and our civilization and our industry in accordance with the tolerance limits of the planet. And at the moment, we are not doing so.
Thanks, Michael. Edward, do you want to comment on it?
Well, if I'm invited to comment, I would say that all my political life I've tried to avoid controversy, but I've also found that if it comes at the expense of candor, you're wasting your and everybody else's time. So I want to say in all candor that I cannot disagree with what has just been said. Or to put it another way, is it possible that Malthus was simply 300 years ahead of his time? Or to put it another way, if 7 times 2 is 14, 14 times 1 is still 14. You can cut the energy in quantum in half, and if the population doubles, you're exactly where you were before.
Debbie, you're nodding away there, did you? Is this an issue that's come up in Southern California? Is it population declining or growing?
It's definitely growing. But that's ultimately the problem, isn't it? And that's the one issue that is it's the third rail. You know, you touch it and you die. Anytime I bring that up in a meeting, it's kind of like, ooh, somebody dared bring up this issue. But I also like to comment about economic growth, because there's this assumption that economic growth is good. But our economy considers cancer good And death and destruction is good because that adds to your economy, because you have to have, you know, companies dealing with earthquakes, whatever. And it's time that we recognize that there's good growth and there's bad growth, and we need to recognize that growth is really a bankrupt philosophy.
Rob? Yeah, I'll bring Rob in, yeah. Rob, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add to that, really, that it's consumption as well as population, obviously, that is the issue. And that the globalized model of what's happening in India and China now, of driving people off the land, people who've been managing land sustainably for centuries, being cleared off to make special economic zones in order to make these economic miracles happen, is really a process, one of the things that really drives population. That actually, in the UK, you can trace the boom in population back to the enclosures. When people were cleared off land, they had no security of land tenure anymore, so they had their ecological footprint, they couldn't relate it to the land that they were on. And you're seeing the same thing in places now where people are being cleared off land in order to do that. So my sense is that actually the relocalization, particularly of food production, taking place here in the West, running parallel with the relocalization of food production there, is really a process that will help bring population down, because people will be more rooted to the land that they're on.
Ed?
Well, the reason we're here today is because we have a system of free enterprise which actually allows companies to deliver on societal goals. And we have to be very careful that, you know, we don't lose sight of that. If business is convinced, as I became convinced in 1997, if business is convinced and incentivized to deliver on the solutions, business will do just that. And that's why I value such conferences today, is to raise awareness about the need for that. But we can actually, we're living in, and it's great for us to lament, and ochone here is an old Irish expression, but to lament what's going on out there. Fact is, we're living in the greatest golden age that ever happened to this species. You know, to about 1.5 billion of us, we're living in the absolute lap of luxury. And we've created all this for ourselves. And the great engines, and the particular engine, the engine that I'm delighted about, is democracy. The engine that allows us to elect our leaders, and the engine that allows us to select leaders who will actually provide a vision. None of us are capable of doing what a collective of vision-driven politicians, elected freely, can do. So I want to be, enter a note of caution here about the doomsday scenario. This planet is probably capable of supporting twice as many people, and capable of even putting us all into very strange science fiction type accommodations, and none of us want that. You go to Holland today and you see 17 million people living in a place the size of Munster. So it's there to be done, and governments have to actually reorient and provide the values and the vision and the incentives for business to do it, and then we will deliver the answers, just as we've delivered food for everybody in the West, and now we're going to deliver it for everybody in China and everybody in India as well.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question, and we can pick it up as we go along. Maybe this pink shirt, yeah, that's pink. That's a pink shirt you're wearing, isn't it? Yeah? Yeah, that's fine. That's grand. Just wanted to make sure I got the colour right.
I just can't let that last comment, much as I liked what Mr. O'Connor, his presentation, you can't say that we can populate the world as densely as Holland, because Holland, according to this ecological footprint analysis, takes...
Yeah, no, you're doing very well without it, actually. And if you could get to the question bit again as soon as you can, yeah?
How in the world can we support more people when, according to a whole series of analyses, we're using at least 3 planets worth of resources right now and going into deficit for the number of people that we have at this time? And why are we going to turn the world over to free enterprise to solve all of our problems when all they want is growth? And even if we put in all of this wind energy, we're going to make wind cheap. That's going to make oil relatively cheaper, and so the Chinese are going to use more of that. this whole never-ending scenario of growth. Where are you going to take us with that, Mr. O'Connor?
Well, Ed, it's up to you. Get on your time machine there, press the button, and tell us where you're taking us.
Freedom, brother. Freedom from these blind forces of nature that determined our species for all but the last 200 years. We can actually, if we've got a good vision and we've got good systems, we can actually build solutions. We're feeding most of the world now, right? Most of the world is. I mean, I don't want to be told that there's 200 so many babies dying every year from lack of food. But the fact is, there's enough food out there, and what's deliver that food system in the world, and could be delivered in spades more than this, is the free enterprise system, because there was something else tried a while ago, and that didn't work.
Sorry, I've taken the question. I have taken the question. Okay, I think you've made your point, sir. I'm going to ask Edward to comment on. Or sorry, Michael, you have your hand up there. You want to comment on this?
Yeah, well, I certainly do.
Yeah, please.
I mean, I'm here as well because I believe in freedom, and I believe that that the history of the past century does show us a number of obvious things. One of which is that we have managed to increase in a dramatic, incredible, marvelous way. We can marvel the extent to which we have managed to increase the food-producing capacity on this planet, not only in terms of numbers of hectares under the plow, so to speak, but also in production per unit. The point, however, is that during my lifetime alone, and I come from a Western Canadian grain-growing context, where we have managed to increase our ability to produce foodstuffs remarkably. The fields look ever so much more beautiful at crop time than they used to years ago. Our tractors are twice and thrice and four times as big. Our cattle are fat, and we produce beef in the feedlots like you wouldn't believe. But every bit of it is based on fossil fuel. Fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, desiccants, you name it. And if anyone thinks that it's going to be easy to wean modern-day agriculture with its incredible food-producing capability off of fossil fuel to something else, they've got another thought coming. Makes it all the more important to realize that we have a tiger by the tail here with the imminence of peak oil. Now, I say again, either we're here just to make an appearance and to engage in the lecture circuit, or we really do believe that mankind is facing the peaking of fossil fuel, and that has implications that boggle the mind. And this facile reference that we can continue to produce a golden age indefinitely into the future, whilst everything is undergoing exponential growth, is frankly ridiculous.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to move on, if I may, to the next question. This gentleman here. Yeah. Again, if you could get your question as soon as you can, let us know who you are.
Very quick. It's for Debbie. She put up a figure there earlier, which was fuel used by her county in regard to transport and waste management. It was 500,000 gallons a year. I read in the Institute of Energy last year in their journal that the US civilian air traffic alone uses 76 billion litres a year in jet fuel, and the US military uses 19 billion litres a year in jet fuel. Where does aviation policy, when you look at it worldwide, come into all of this? The Minister got a bit of a grinding last week on questions and answers in regard to Shannon and Ireland's aviation policy here, and Bord Fáilte wanting 30 million tourists to come in here instead of 20 million. Sustainability doesn't seem to be an issue in regard to government policy or transport. I'd like some comments from anyone on
Well,
that.
thanks for that. Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Debbie. Ball's in your court on that one. We'll start with the American massive consumption of aviation fuel and how that can be addressed, given its impact on the problem.
Well, there's obviously high-speed transport would fill the bill in so many areas in the United States. I'd like to comment, though, on the tenor of this discussion here, because I think you shouldn't make value judgments on whether our lifestyle today is a better one than my grandmother, who was born in 1883, lived 102 years, and I think she was much happier. Maybe she only had 2 pairs of shoes. Maybe I have 20, but I certainly don't need 20. And so we can live very comfortably and happily on much less energy, including air traffic, air travel. I don't have to fly at a whim to San Francisco. There's so much we could do without and still be very happy, and I think we'd be much happier, actually.
Michael? Yeah.
Yes, I think air travel is the single biggest question in trying to deal with climate change. The United States, and I don't mention that pejoratively, but the United States has 5% of the world's population, is responsible for 25% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, half of which is cars and planes. And air travel, airline industry, is the cause of the fastest rising amount of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. So, and it has been calculated that if this goes on at this rate by 2050, then even if all other forms of carbon emission were eliminated, which of course is total fantasy, we would still not have reduced the overall level of greenhouse gas emissions because of the rise caused by air travel. So it's a huge problem. And what I think makes me so angry is that in economics, if there is an economic bad, you tend to tax it. What have we done with regard to air travel? We actually subsidize it. In the case of Britain, I don't know about other countries, the actual real terms cost of air travel goes down by about 1 to 1.5% a year. I mean, that's crazy. That's the exact opposite of what we ought to be doing. It is causing our fundamental problem, and we are using taxpayers' money to encourage people to do more of it. I mean, we need that like a hole in the head. What we should do is probably put a tax on aviation fuel above. I'm not particularly in favour of increased taxes, except as a last resort. But what we should do is tell the airline industry, and don't forget, I'm afraid I have to say it was the US which in 1997 at Kyoto, which I attended, insisted that the airline industry should be excluded from the ambit of the Kyoto Protocol. And thus it has remained ever since. The airline industry ought to be brought in within the Kyoto Protocol, told like every other industry to reduce its emissions gradually but steadily, year by year. And we should all, in our own countries, and maybe this applies to the United States, certainly applies to Britain, we should seek to phase out short-haul flights and replace them by fast trains. TGV. That's the obvious answer locally. But if we don't deal with this, as Nate Hagen said this morning, this desire of human beings, our grandparents scarcely went beyond the next village. We go across the world. No doubt our grandchildren will get married on Mars. I mean, there is a limit to how much this industry can take the world without producing the catastrophic effects of climate change. We have to deal with air travel. It's politically very sensitive, but it's absolutely essential.
I just want to take a question here at the back yeah.
Eddie, could I say something on the
Yeah, sure, you can, of course, Rob, just before we take the next question, of course.
I just wanted to say, that in terms of air travel, I think, there's a lot we can do in terms of trying to get things working on the bigger scale, like Michael was just saying, but also there's an increasing movement of people who are actually choosing voluntarily to withdraw their support from the aviation industry. I gave up flying a year and a half ago. I came here on the coach. I went to ASPO6 in Pisa on the train. I was supposed to speak at a conference in Washington the other day. I sent them a DVD of my talk and saved £2,788 of carbon by so doing, which is more than my annual allowance under a carbon rationing system. So, it's not something we have to wait for. We can do it ourselves.
Well, actually, just before I take the next question, because I got a written question which really is in that space, and it says, what are the viable energy-saving strategies? In other words, what are the simple things that people should and could be doing like that in order to save on energy costs?
Me?
Yeah.
Easy things you can do at home. Well, one of the best things I came across recently was a thing called an ElectriSave. And you plug it onto the main electricity cable coming in your house, and you have a little monitor that sits on your table in the kitchen or wherever you want. I carry it around the house with me. I've become so obsessed with this thing. And it tells you at that moment in your house how much electricity you're using, either in pence or kilowatt hours or whatever. And it's fantastic with the kids, getting them trained up, and they become completely obsessive about what's on. And so that's been really useful in terms of cutting it down. All the usual things, local food.
I think that's an important question. I think that every citizen has the ability to address some part of that particular issue, make a contribution, be it large or small, whether it be in household heating, domestic heating, whether it be in the amount of journeys that we make overseas or whatever. And I realise that as an island we have only limited ways of getting off the island, but nonetheless we can limit, we can carefully decide on what we're going to do. But the other thing I think that comes out of this, which is very important, I think we shouldn't panic. I think the very fact that conferences like this deal with the issues and actually come up with solutions is a positive thing. Because instead of a few years ago, we would have heard, the doom and gloom situation, everything is bad, the glass is not half empty, but totally empty, and panic sets in, and people get despondent, we get fatalistic. I think that's a very dangerous route to go. But I think that all of the conferences of this nature, energy conferences that I've attended, there were solutions that were visible, that were attainable, that were manageable, and I think that's the secret.
Yeah, Debbie, yeah.
The two biggest things you can do, the number one thing is reduce your driving, and the number two thing is eat less meat.
Edward? Yeah,
well,
Edward.
Mr. Chairman, while agreeing in total pretty well with what's just been said by the previous two speakers, it nevertheless does cry out for the following to be added. Of course, we mustn't panic, because, in fact, that is the most counterproductive of all courses of action. But look, what is the title of the subtitle of this afternoon's panel? It is there time? And that is a very pregnant and appropriate way to put it, because if we start in time, then we have some reasonable assurance that we will not panic, or those that come after us won't have to. But if we keep procrastinating and procrastinating some more in the face, it's the scale of the problem of the issue that is the problem. We're talking not about some few thousand or even a few million of units of energy. We're talking about 85 million barrels a day of oil and going up. We're talking about approximately 60 million barrels of oil equivalent in natural gas and going up. North America has already peaked on natural gas, ironic but true, and you see where we're heading. And the only way we can responsibly say to those who come after that we have tried to avoid the conditions of panic is that we started 1 or 2 decades in advance, because that's the kind of lead time that's involved when you're talking quantums of this kind. You don't put in place 1,000 megawatt power units or 1,001 wind turbines at 1,500 or 2,000 horsepower. I don't know what you're building, Eddie, but I suppose they're about 2,000 horsepower. You don't do that in a few years. That takes time, lots of time.
Okay, take the next question. This gentleman here, it looks as if he's playing. You were a former basketball player, were you?
I never asked my question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, in the context of possibly the first run on the British bank since the 1930s, I've read in certain places about the dependence on the financial system on economic growth. And of course, economic growth being dependent on fuel. I was wondering what the panel thought might be the effects of peak oil in the next few years on our financial system, and what advice they might give to people to prepare for this.
That's a very interesting question. Michael, I'm going to put that one to you in terms of the British administration, any examination of the impact of peak oil. I mean, the Irish policy is off the wall. I mean, we're assuming that oil is going to be at $100 a barrel in 2020, so we may as well flush that down the toilet. Has the British government seriously examined the impact on the British economy of oil going to double or treble its present pricing level? Yes.
No. One of the things that struck me, well, two things struck me, I think, particularly about Debbie Cook's excellent presentation, was when she said that public opinion drives the politicians and the media drives public opinion. And I immediately thought, in that case, we're all doomed. The fact is, government do have a role, a very important role. I think all of these movements that we heard about in Southern California, in Totnes, in Woking, this report which was given to me, a guidebook on peak oil and global warming for local governments, these local movements are happening, and what we need is to network and combine them in order that they become a national force and to press the case for change much more powerfully. Now, the other thing that Debbie Cook said was how many times peak oil was mentioned in the Los Angeles Times, and the answer was 0. And how many times was it mentioned in Cabinet? And the answer is 0. And how many times was it mentioned in the press? Well, I haven't checked on the English press, but I would be surprised if it's more than the fingers of one hand. This is an issue which the politicians, the government, the departments know perfectly well about, but they don't want us to talk about it, partly because, showing my political colours, I think this lies behind the awful, endless, murderous carnage in the Middle East, and they don't want us talking about it. It's absolutely essential that we talk about it. As has been said, we have even who I can't remember his name, Jim Hansen, the Bush's guru with regard to climate change modelling, that we have at most 10 years to ward off the worst effects of climate change. 10 years! I mean, 10 years is the batting of an eyelid in terms of real time. We need to take action now. There is no discussion on this at all. I mean, I just feel we are sleepwalking to doom. I mean, I think looking back, as we historians will look back, one of the things they will say, it's not just the British government, although, you know, I'm here, I'm not representing the British government anymore, thank God, but the fact is, I was Minister for the Environment in the Blair government, if that's not a contradiction in terms. The fact is, this is an issue which is more important than any other single issue. It's very painful, it's very difficult, and it needs a lot of political courage to address it. But if we don't, the results will be catastrophic, and our children and our grandchildren will look back at us and say, Dad, Grandpa, what did you do when you had the chance to take these decisions? And I'm afraid for many members of our government and many members of other governments, I'm afraid the answer was nil.
Eddie, on behalf of the free market sector, in isolation here in the room, it seems that you want to...
See, the big difference between me and the last speaker is that I'm doing something about it, right? And all this talk, we've got to figure out if we're going to, and we are, going to a period when the thing that we built the riches of the world on is going away, and what effect is that going to have? Well, up to 2 billion people are going to die because they're going to have nothing to buy with. Inflation is going to, like it did in every other oil crisis, and this is the only one that I've heard of where there wasn't inflation, inflation is going to rob the wealth that all of us here have made and that all the rest of the world has made. And it's incumbent on us to do and put together some real plans as to how we're going to deal with it. Now, I believe we have to combine in Europe, that the 25 nations in Europe have to combine to do to capture that offshore grid that we talked about. And we have to start building that, and we have to incentivise our businesses so there isn't just electricity doing it. And by the way, you know, somebody said here that we should stop driving. I'd just like to tell you, next Friday, every staff member in our company is not going to use the car coming to work. Those that are going to work, I'm going to France actually, I'm flying to France, the Ireland play rugby. That's an accident of history, by the way. They would have loved to see me walking in or cycling in, which I like to do. But they're all going to be coming in. We'll have an empty car park. So we're doing that on the micro level. But I'm trying to address the issue here of how is business going to stop being this oil thing is the great thing that you know, you hear about Sir Lord Brown of Mattingly, the guy who was in charge of BP. You hear about all these great heroes. Well, I think you have to make heroes out of the people who actually go out and try and do something about it, who actually try to make some money out of it and can fail, can lose their jobs, can lose their livelihoods, and use the system that we have. That's the free enterprise approach, Eddie.
Yeah, Edward, I'm going to move on because I'm just conscious we've got 10 minutes left and I want to squeeze in as many questions as I can. Right at the back, yeah, standing right at the back. There you go.
Paul Sears, Natural Resources Canada.
Sorry, just can you speak up a small bit? Yeah.
Paul Sears, Natural Resources Canada, a federal government department within the Canadian government. It's already been referred to a few times. Why is it so difficult for a national politician to stand up and say what's going on? You replied that it was cowardice. Are they all cowards?
Yeah, well, let's start with Canada there. Edward, do you want to respond? Why is it so? Why aren't politicians standing up and being brave on this issue?
Well, I don't know if I should pose as an expert on that, although I did serve in the Canadian House of Commons. But anyway, I think that it can be said that politics and the political methods and modalities are slowly changing, sometimes for the better, but not always, sometimes for the worse. And to answer the question as best I can, I too am puzzled as to why it is that something as fundamental as future energy prospects and the energy/environmental footprint impact equation are so little talked about in Parliament, although climate change has come into some currency of discussion in Parliament in Canada lately, only lately. I think one of the reasons is, twofold. One, the nature of the political system in my country has been for more and more presidentialization of the parliamentary system and the Prime Minister and cabinet government even. The backbencher has been marginalized more and more. He has been ignored, he or she has been ignored by the media. There was a time when if a member of Parliament made a statement, it would be reported. Not anymore. Now what's reported maybe is what a cabinet minister says, and even that's being put on the back burner. It all depends on what the first minister, the prime minister says. And that's not what parliamentary democracy is all about. That's not the way it was meant to work. It's been being presidentialized. So that's one reason, I think. The second reason is that there's so much riding on this. Governments don't want to be accused of ruining things for the stock market analyst and for those kiting stock on the stock exchange and for companies that are financed on the stock exchange. There are implications, and therefore candor suffers. You start pulling your punches, you say less and less, and over time you say less and less still. And then people begin to lose interest in the political democratic process. I am one of those, by the way. I feel very frustrated when I can sense an argument building up whether it's going to be private enterprise, free enterprise, or the marketplace, or whether it's going to be government. The fact is that in our day and age we need both, each in their place. I have still faith in our parliamentary democratic institutions, and they have not been pulling their weight. I agree with Eddie that a great deal of attention should be paid to those who are trying to do something. But then again, let's not lull ourselves into the false comfort thinking that, oh, there's a problem, the market will deal with it. In fact, Eric Seberide once said, that solutions are the problem. I mean, if markets cause the problem, don't expect them to provide the solutions ipso facto.
Yeah, well, just to stay on that issue for a second there. Thanks. Michael, you're very eloquent, passionate and informed on this. You sat around the cabinet table in Downing Street and they supported the American invasion of Iraq to go after, the oil. Why weren't more ministers around that table convinced by what you had to say? Because you certainly had enough time to say to them.
Well, why other people were not convinced is, I suppose, something that you would have to ask them. But I think the answer to the question as to why politicians are unwilling to be courageous over this issue, not that I think it does need a very great deal of courage. I think this is an upcoming issue which millions of people out there are increasingly responding to. And the extraordinary thing is that the politicians can't see it, that there is a large constituency out there which is actually going to carry them forward at election times, but they don't see it. Now, I think there are three reasons. I agree. One is the centralisation of power. And I was thinking in Britain that's happened with spades. The fact is the Cabinet is marginalised, Parliament is not seriously listened to, the party is nowhere, and the electorate, when it comes to do we go to war over Iraq, 2 million people marched and they were just ignored. So it's a very serious issue. I think the breakdown of accountability, the destruction of the mechanisms for holding to account of our leaders, I think is a very, very big political issue in our country.
I want to...
But can I say just very quickly, two other points. I think it is poverty of vision. I really do. I'm afraid I think we are living far too much in the last 2 decades. We're fighting issues about the role of the private market in public services. Of course that's an important issue. But far, far bigger issues are now permeating the landscape, and it's as though the politicians have their head down and just do not see the reality. So I think poverty of vision. The other thing, which I think is very important, is vested interests. I mean, who wants to keep the world the way it is? The oil industry, the chemical industry, the food industry, the car industry, the airline industry. These are very powerful. Who rules Britain? Not Parliament. I'll tell you who rules Britain. It is the Prime Minister with a small cabal around him of unelected advisers, not including members even of the Cabinet, meeting regularly with leaders of business, leaders of finance, and I have to say with Mr. Murdoch, leaders of the media, and taking the decisions over our heads which is then imposed on us. That's the actual situation we face. It is a very serious breakdown of democracy. And until we deal with that, and until we regard that as an issue which is central to solving all of our other issues, including the environment and climate change, we're not going to get very far.
Thank you. Debbie, you want to come in? Well, if I may, I'm going to bring in Debbie on this because they've had some political leadership in California.
Well, blaming others is a way of avoiding the challenge yourself.
Hear, hear.
And as long as you're blaming someone, you're not actually taking action.
Hear, hear.
And I'd like to go back to my original comment, which is this is not a technical problem. This is a behavioral problem. And no politician can deal with these kinds of adaptive challenges that we face. I mean, there's no win for them. So it has to come from the ground up, and it has to come very strongly and forcefully, and that's how you're going to deal with it. You're absolutely right. The status quo is very difficult to change, but.
Okay, listen, I'm just going to take one last question because I'm conscious of the fact that we're closing in quickly on 5 o'clock. So if I.
What did he say?
Sorry. Oh, well, there you go. All right. Oh, that's an excellent idea, if rather robustly put forward. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm feeling very lonely here as one of the only women here, and I'm delighted that Debbie Cook is here as well. I'm a local politician in Cork, And I'd like to ask Eddie O'Connor and also Debbie Cook, in Cork Southwest, wind farms are beginning to come in a big way. I'm very supportive of wind farms. I come from the same party as our Minister. The problem is there is a huge public opposition to wind farms in West Cork. Any politician like myself who is trying to promote these things is facing certain death at the next election. And I would like to ask Eddie O'Connor or Debbie, how can people like me or like any of us convince the public about such things as wind farms? Because no wind farms will be built in this country unless there is public support. Because in Ireland, environmental groups are incredibly strong, as people know, and there has to be some policy by companies like Airtricity to engage with the public to try and convince them of the values of these things, or there will be no wind farms. So
well, that's a very good question. It's a universal question, and how do we get over the not in my backyard, the NIMBY reaction to the type of changes that are needed, the vested interest groups, even at a local level? Yeah, I'm going to ask Bernard that question, actually. Just if you could come in just on...
I'm familiar about with the West Cork situation. I think you have to argue your case. It is just part of our democracy. We are reluctant. We're reluctant to bring about change, I think, and especially on environmental issues. And there are all sorts of people who have genuine concerns. They have genuine concerns, and I think we have to argue our case, as in all cases in relation to planning matters. But the other thing I would just refer back to something that Michael said earlier on, I think about politicians almost being not able to cut through the smoke, as it were, and to deliver. We do it all the time. The fact that people don't connect with it at the appropriate time, that we think they should connect, is not really something that we can do anything about. It's when from the grassroots up that the surge comes that will happen. We cannot force people to believe or to react to what we say, even though we might say it with passion and fervour and say it repeatedly. But unless there is that reverberation from the community, from the people at large, then it won't happen. And I fully accept that there's been change in governmental styles all over Europe. But at least in this country we still have people in cabinet who are elected. In other countries, many other countries, we don't. But it's just one of the things where accountability still comes in, and the public have the last word.
I'm going to bring Eddie O'Connor in on this, and then Debbie, if I may, because this is really a key question to end our session on.
Well, you mentioned not in my backyard. We've met some other concepts as well, like banana. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody. And then there's the final category, which are the notes, not over there either. So I have to say that Ireland has a pretty good planning system. We engage with the community absolutely from the word go. We've got 80% of the plannings that we've applied for in Ireland. We know that windmills are not a noise issue. We know that windmills are nothing only, that they change the environment in which largely people who don't live in the area want to come back and see and they grew up in. And we've had literally throughout Scotland, Scandinavia, California, several other places, about 2/3 of the population positively like them, about another nearly a third, or well, let's say up to 95% are kind of, maybe slightly negative, but that would never do anything about it. And then you've got the 5% vocal minority. And once you get a man in public to get up and say he doesn't like something, he can never come back from that. So the whole objective of good wind farming is to engage with the community early. And if you see you're not going to get planning permission, if you genuinely see you're not going to get planning permission, you walk away quickly. Because there's no point in throwing good money after bad. You really have our fundamental philosophy in Airtricity, and we have 7 values, is respect. And if we don't respect the local communities and the local authorities and all the local institutions, we're going to get arrogant and we're going to get proud and we get nowhere. And that's not the way we are. So we have that attitude, and that's a fundamental building block of the company that we have.
Debbie?
First of all, I love your question, and I'd like to talk to you afterwards, so please don't leave. Because we developed a strategy in Southern California along an issue having to do with density, because Southern Californians hate density. They equate that to slums. You have to give the work back to the people. And the way we did that was develop workshops throughout Southern California to bring them the issues We have this many houses that are going to be built because of all the added population. We can either sprawl like we are, or you come up with a plan that you like better. And we came up with this plan that we could accommodate all the increased growth by just taking that and putting it in areas that are along transit nodes, that are in the cities already, and it has much less impact. You already have the infrastructure, all of those things, but you do that through community workshops and you have people come in, you tell them the problem, and they solve it, and they all come to the same conclusion. It's like a focus group, really. And you can defeat the opposition by just educating them. And I know it takes time, but it actually takes less time, because then you don't have these constant hurdles that you have to cross.
So I think if I'm summarising that, Debbie, you're saying that you let people come to the belief themselves rather than impose a belief on them.
Exactly. It actually saves time and money in the long run, but it does take some coordination.
Listen, folks, it's 5:05. I promised to finish this session at 5, so I'm going to finish it right now. It was very, very lively, and thank you very much for your participation to the audience and to the members of the panel. It was a very, very useful session.